The South East London Folklore Society is held on the second Thursday of every month at the King's Head in London Bridge. The following talk is by Simon Brighton and is about the Knights Templar.
This is the book that I wrote a few years ago to do with the Knights Templars. And this is the outline for the talk this evening. We'll talk about the early Templars and then the UK sites. Maybe the demise. But afterwards I want to talk about Ireland, and I had a mysterious correspondence. When I do these talks I don't normally get all mysterious and sort of weird, but I actually had somebody that corresponded with me over a period of about 2 or 3 months. He must have sent me about 3 or 4 or more emails a day with lots and lots of information about Ireland. And really the idea, it's a lady, and what she wanted me to do was to sort of review the information that she was giving me and give my opinion, and also say whether I had seen examples of what she was sending me elsewhere. And anyway, after about 2 or 3 months, she just stopped any communication whatsoever. And I have no idea why. I haven't been able to contact her again. So when Nigel asked me about doing this talk, I thought, okay, that's good. I can do this sort of do Templar stuff, and I could probably include a bit of what this lady had sent me, which would make an interesting sort of part of the talk. So when I went back to review a lot of what she was sent and to put it into sort of perspective, it actually started making a lot more sense than when I first got it, because when I first got it she was just sending me things in chunks and I wasn't really putting it together. So anyway, after the break I'll go on to it really what she was talking about was the Templars in Ireland, and I'll talk a bit about that after the break. Okay, this is a picture I took probably 10 years ago or so, and it's of the Temple Church in London, and Dan Brown pinched it for his website. After Dan Brown pinched it, they then asked me if they could use it in the book for the Da Vinci Code, which I said yes, of course. And then I got the idea of doing a book, and for doing a book was the idea of going around Britain taking pictures of Templar sites. I grew up in Lincolnshire, right next to a Templar site, so I had a good knowledge and had a lot of sort of interest in Templars from that time. There was a guy called Tim Staniland who lived in Lincolnshire, and he was doing websites at that time called the Templars in Britain. And these were on the sort of the early days of the internet, where if you put a picture up, it would be the only one. This is why Dan Brown pinched it, because it was the only one of the Temple Church that's actually on the internet, so it was quite easy to find. So after that, I did the book, which I researched and so on. So what I'm going to do now is go through and sort of talk about the Templars' origins and then onto the sites. When I first did these talks, a lot of people in the audience didn't know anything about the Templars at all, which is quite strange, because I think people tend to know a bit more now about their origins and the stories about them, particularly with that of the Da Vinci Code, having mentioned them in various forms. Right, beginnings. So this is the First Crusade. The First Crusade culminated in the capture of Jerusalem in 1099. This is the rough route of the First Crusade. After the First Crusade, Jerusalem has been captured. For about 20 years, it's captured, but there isn't really any organised resistance. But what happens is, in 20 years' time, things start to get difficult. You have these pilgrims arriving and trying to get to Jerusalem, to visit Jerusalem, and they're being ambushed and killed along the way. And the thing is about these pilgrims is a lot of the pilgrims that were coming over were the VIPs of the time, because they had heard that Jerusalem had been captured, and they wanted to go and visit the holy places, which was one of the reasons for the crusade to take place in the first place, for people to start to revisit the holy places. Well, if they were getting captured and killed and taken into slavery, it wasn't very good PR. So what happened was that there was a need for an organised army, and into that sort of void stepped the Templars, Hugh de Payne and 8 other knights, who all kind of knew each other. History shows that they had connections going back. They weren't just a random collection that had arrived. So they suggested a sort of a revolutionary idea that they would take the monastic, they would sort of live under a monastic structure, but at the same time be an organised fighting force, a professional army. What had happened at the time of the Crusades, you had sort of armies that were seasonal. People would fight in the fighting season, and then they would go back to the crops, and they'd go back to their families. What the Templars were doing was just suggesting a professional army, the first professional army really since the Romans. And as such, they became very effective because they trained, they were able to demonstrate effectiveness. And also, the other thing to remember with knights is that a knight there may have just been 9 knights, but these were 9 nobles, so they actually had a retinue and people around them. It was quite huge. So 9 knights could present a big fighting force. People say, how could 9 knights just decide they were going to protect pilgrims? Well, 9 knights was quite a big organisation because you'd have squires and people, so you could present quite a good force. For about 10 years, it was all quiet. I mean, the Templars actually professed not to keep records. They said that they were going to be a functional force. They sort of said that record keeping was for the other monastic orders. The Templars were functional, and they professed themselves to be men of the sword rather than the men of the pen. So for 10 years, it was quite quiet. And the first real sort of official record of the Templars' existence comes about 10 years later, when they were presented at the Council of Troyes by, St. Bernard was their patron. St. Bernard was the guy that sort of promoted them, and he also had sort of a functional rule, a functional part in their sort of formation, is that he rewrote the rule that they should take. And the rule, a monastic rule, is the kind of order that you live by. So it says what your uniform's going to be, how you should cut your hair, how you should punish people, diet, prayer. Obviously, because the Templars were fighting, they had to have an adapted rule, because they had to be fit. They couldn't live a life of denial, because they needed to be big and strong to fight in battle. So this is from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, where it says, what happened is after the Council of Troyes, Hugh then set out to have sort of a PR exercise about. He travelled around Europe, raising people's sort of awareness of the Templars and what a good thing they were doing. And this is in the early sort of life of the Templars, they were viewed very, very positively. And so this is what it says. Hugh of the Temple came to Normandy. He got donations there. He then came to England, got more donations, and then up to Scotland, got more donations. And these donations are either land or actual sort of money and gold and so on. It says here. The thing is, with it, you have to appreciate in England, you've got the 1066 sort of conquest has just happened. It's relatively soon after, so there is a lot of land that's around that can be donated, and often the people that were in the invaders, they often felt a little bit guilty about invading. So one of the things they did was to donate some of their land back to the Templars, which kind of dealt with their guilt a little bit. This is the Templar seal that was adopted fairly early on, with the classic one with the 2 men on the horse, and around the edge it says "Seal of the Soldiers of Christ." The Templar name came because they were given headquarters actually on the temple plain in Jerusalem, and they also looked at themselves as guardians of the temple, as guardians of Jerusalem, guardians of the temple. So I'm just going to move on to talk about UK sites and their influence and effect in the United Kingdom. The name temple, when it was attached to a name in England, used to be thought that they were Roman temples. You can find quite a lot of old books that talk about sort of Druidical or Roman temples in these places. It's now known that pretty much all of the places that have a temple name associated with them are to do with the Knights Templars. So this is just a quick list of, there's about 130 or 40 places which have this temple name today in Britain. There you go, there's a couple of pages. The this doesn't mean that each place with the name Temple was actually lived in by Templars, or they had a castle there or something. It may be that it was just land that was donated to them that they got the revenue from, and the name persists really because of often because of tax reasons, which is something I'll come back to. These are the sites that I've included in the book. So this is the map from my book, but these are the sites that are visitable today. One of the things you can see is that a lot of the sites are towards the east of England and towards Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. These places were the biggest Templar areas because they were peaceful and they could create a lot of commerce there, and they could trade. There was a lot of trade that went on with the sort of Hanseatic countries, the Flanders markets and so on, and they were slightly after the Cistercians, but using a similar model of developing local industry in terms of wool and so on, and then exporting it. This is South Witham Preceptory, which is Lincolnshire. South Witham is quite significant. It was a site that was abandoned by the Templars, or it was left by the Templars when they were suppressed after they finished, and it wasn't actually retaken over by anybody else. So they did an excavation in the 60s on it, which was quite interesting because obviously it was a Templar property that hadn't been adapted or changed in any way. This is a recuration of it. The name Preceptory, as up there, is a little bit confusing because Preceptory is generally the English name for a Templar manor. The name Preceptory doesn't tend to occur in Europe or elsewhere. But what happens is, when the Templars finished, the Hospitallers, who took over a lot of Templar property, renamed Preceptories Commanderies. And you find the name Commandery in Europe and also in Britain, where they've changed the name. So what they're doing is they're taking the Cistercian model, which is like adapting big areas, using the feudal system to get people to generate income, and they're there to generate funds for the Crusades. They are using. They're not. It's obviously a very, very efficient model. And if you want to know why the Templars became so powerful and so rich, it was because they had this sort of collectivization and they didn't pay taxes. So this was very important because they didn't pay taxes at all, which they gave them obviously a great advantage in local commerce. And it's something that generated, and the amount of wool and crops and so on they were able to generate was on a real industrial scale, particularly in these areas like Lincolnshire and Yorkshire, where you had these big open lands. I just think this South Witham site was actually excavated in the 60s, and the write-up only came out in the 80s, or 2002, which is quite interesting because the write-up of this excavation is one of the most thorough that's ever been done, and it includes things like autopsies on the bones that they found, and all the finds and X-rays and so on. So it's quite a substantial piece of work. Right, this is an aerial shot of the excavation as it was going on. This is the same plan. If you see, this is like the hall and the barns at the end. That's the hall and the barns at the end here. As I said, it was untouched by the Hospitallers, and it was a good example of the local functional headquarters for the Templars generating funds and so on. Right. This is an aerial shot from Google. This shows you, this is the area where the preceptory was, and this is South Witham Church where it is. The other thing to note is that you've got these Roman roads, and the Roman roads are very important. Most of the Templar properties were on places that you could use them for transport, so you could get to the ports and you could get your stuff out to trade. So you either had navigable rivers or Roman roads at this time. I put a tunnel there. A lot of the places that have old Templar property often have legends of tunnels, and it seems to be an absolute almost a real feature. There's reputed to be a tunnel from here down to the church, And in fact, one of the houses along that line actually has their basement is a tunnel, so that the house exists, and then you can go down into the basement, and the basement is a blocked up tunnel stretching. So there does seem to be some evidence, and Templar tunnels have been found in places like Acre, where they had castles. There have been Templar tunnels found at later dates. This is just a picture to show you the scale. So you can see it's a big old place. You know, you've got this. This is the end bit here, just this end bit here. So it's a substantial sort of place. This is in the local church in South Witham, and this is a tomb, grave slab that was recovered from the site, and is quite interesting. Right, let's move on to Temple Brewer, which is quite close to South Witham. You've got South Witham here, and then going up Ermine Street, Temple Brewer is here. Temple Brewer is also interesting because it still exists as it was in Templar times. It hasn't been changed much. This is a print done in 1726 by one of the Buck brothers, who were sort of famous for doing prints of antiquities at that time. You can see this is the tower that still exists today. At that time, there's still part of the round church was existing, and there was also the entrance to the crypt, or a tunnel or something here. I presume it's the crypt, which was excavated later, which is not accessible now. This is the tower that's existing today. You can see from some of the little marks, you can see that originally the altar was here. This is the east end. You had two towers, as this shows. This is the tower that's existing today, and this was the church that existed at the time. The Templars have this reputation for building round churches, and in fact there are 8 known round churches in England, which is at Aslockby, which is Lincolnshire, Temple Brewer, which is this one, Garway in the Welsh borders, Dover, Hereford, Bristol, and there's the 2 round churches in London. This round church is the sort of classic early Romanesque type of round church. The one we have in London now is a later sort of model of Templar church, which replaced their original one. This is the Temple Brewer church. This is a plan done from an excavation that was done. You've got 8 pillars, and you've got various bits of sort of additions as it went on. One of the things about the 8 pillars and the figure 8 is quite interesting. It's something that comes up quite a lot with Templar sort of symbols and so on, is that there's the idea that the round churches were based on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. There's also a notion that perhaps it was also based on the octagonal geometry of the mosques. I'm still talking about Temple Brewer, but the only place that you can actually see an original round church in the same style as the early Templar churches would have been is this round church in Cambridge, which isn't Templar, but it is an early Romanesque. It was restored, but it is an early Romanesque style church, and it's very similar to the early Templar churches. And also, of course, itself the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Romanesque style is featured by, you have sort of often have these sort of chevrons, and you also have sort of a single material building style. So you have these thick columns, and it's all built of the same material. When the Gothic style comes in, it came in during the Crusades, you have different materials, and so you can see that something like a pillar here would be a harder material supporting a huge amount of weight. Here, and the vaulting would be different materials, and this is how sort of the Gothic technology worked. So we're still on Temple Brewer. This is the Ermine Street, and you can see that there's the Templar sites along Ermine Street. Certainly these ones in Lincolnshire, up to the port. They had 2 huge sites, which have now nothing exists. One was Willerton, which was the largest preceptory in the country. There's nothing there at all now, apart from a few lumps and bumps in the ground. And then you had the Templar port at Faxfleet on the Humber, where there would be a lot of trade going on with the Hanseatic countries, Scandinavia, and sort of Flanders and so on. But nothing exists of either of those, apart from A couple of bumps in the ground, really. It's quite surprising. So this is Templar. Again, you have a tunnel, which is reputedly a tunnel. A friend of mine has actually found a tunnel quite close to this, but it's not actually where that tunnel says it is. But he's found one elsewhere, which he hasn't told me any more about. At least he sent me a photo. These are two maps showing the same thing. Here you have 5 lanes meeting with St John's Church in the middle. You've got the Templar Preceptory here, and you've got the training ground, a place called Bayard's Leap here. Bayard's Leap is called Bayard's Leap because there's legends of witches, and Bayard was a horse which leapt after a witch had landed on its back, and there was a knight involved in this legend. I won't go through the whole legend, it'll take some time, but it's an interesting site, and there's still the horseshoes in the ground. If you go to Bayard's Leap, there's still the horseshoes in the ground where there's a cafe next to it as well, where the horse leapt from. So this is Ermine Street, which was the functional road, the north-south road in those times. I'll put a little hat on because that's where I grew up. That's why I got interested in it. This is Cranwell RAF base as well. So. There were two sort of excavations done at Templar, and they were sort of like a little bit apart, but they were sort of dimensions apart in terms of the attitude and the effectiveness of it. The first excavation was done by a guy called Reverend Oliver in 1837, and that was very full of kind of ideas about murder and people being walled up and so on. The second excavation was done in 1901, and that was done by a guy called St John Hope, who was actually one of the founders of the Antiquarian Society, and he was far more professional in his dig of Templar Brewer. St John, this is the Reverend Oliver. This is kind of some of his texts that he talks about walled up bodies, death, immuring, 2 holes in the skull, violence, etc., etc. I mean, he had a bit of a kind of like a bias against the Templars, and you can see from his report, which was then later, I mean, really the later one was done as a sort of a way of answering this, because this was very much based on the sort of very negative attitude people had to. When I grew up, people still had very negative attitudes toward the Templars, and they were viewed as quite sinister, even when I was a kid. So this is where it came from a little bit. This is the tower again today, and you can see the actual and a lot of sort of additional things that have been added to the tower here with the lines which were sort of like from the cloisters, I think. This is the interior of the tower. Some of these, often within these buildings, you get things that were outside that have been brought inside, and there's a lot of bits and pieces in these towers which have been brought in from the outside just to keep them safe. And one of them is this tomb lid. This is another shot. Around this tower there is this symbol which has been etched all over the tower. My feeling is this is quite consistent with what you'd call apotropaic ritual protection marks, which were medieval features which you often find them in eastern England. I'm not quite sure, but Norfolk has a lot of carpenter sort of wood frame buildings that have these apotropaic marks in. And this is a room called Degas, which is quite a relatively common apotropaic mark. And it's been etched around the whole of the tower. So my suggestion would be that this is something that was done after the Templars had left, and to do with the sinister reputation of the place, and it was done as a sort of a way of ritually cleansing the place. There's quite a few other examples, which is these are all from the tower. This is Degas again. You've got the 3 M's, which is another common ritual protection mark, and you've got the sort of triquetra design, which is another common ritual. So it's full of them, which I presume is done by fairly sort of traditions of sort of late medieval attitudes towards the Templars, because obviously, as they were just after they were suppressed and so on, the Templars were regarded by a lot of people as being very sinister. This is Degas, and this is the room Degas here. And Degas has been picked up, as I say, for one reason or another, as a sort of ritual protection mark. Kew Palace has some ritual protection marks as well, which have recently been discovered. Often they were thought to be Mason's marks, but now there seems to be a greater sort of taxonomy, and a lot of people are doing a lot of work in churches to identify what are ritual protection marks, what are things like plague inscriptions, and to try and work out what's what. There's also this which I'll refer to a few times. There's this symbol as well, which crops up a few times, which is this kind of infinity figure 8 symbol. And a last bit of, this is a great bit of graffiti from Templar. No one knows what it means. A couple of people have hazarded guesses, but it's a great bit of sort of graphics, but no one really knows what. I guess it's in Latin. It looks old, you know, if you look at the style of the Templar is full of graffiti of one sort or another, and it goes from very old medieval graffiti right through to sort of modern, more cruder graffiti. So I'm going to move on briefly to some other UK sites. This is one Templar tube station, which is obviously on the site of the London Temple. That's the Temple Church in London. This was the HQ for the Templars. I mean, the Templars' HQ proper was Paris, but their HQ for the UK was London. And they had two. The London Temple was the Templars' second round church in London. That's why it's quite sort of slightly modern, more modern in style. The first Temple Church in London was at the top of Southampton Row, which was a similar one of these Romanesque churches. And then they moved. They got more donations and sort of donations that were closer to the Thames, so they were able to move down to where they are now, or where the round church is now. This is the two sites. So if you look, this is the Temple Church, this is Chancery Lane, and this is the site of their old church. So Chancery Lane was actually made by the Templars trooping backwards and forwards between the two sites because they coexisted for a while. This was a little sort of a sculpture put up for the millennium outside the Temple Church. This photo shows the war damage. I got a couple of photos, and this is very interesting because when I took this photo to the church and I was asking people where the photo was taken from, it took people quite a long time to work out. And I was most people that see it are very surprised about actually how much rebuilding is being done. This is a photo taken from roughly the same position. The way I tell you how you can tell is you look here in the pavement changes sort of course, you know, the line of the pavement changes slightly there, and you've got this wall here with sort of these bricks. And if you go back to this, you can see that's where the line of the pavement changes, and those are those bricks. So you can see all what's behind there, well, including all this, but all what's behind there is all gone, including this sort of side chapel here. And now none of this exists, and all this has been rebuilt, which is quite amazing. And again, another shot from the war damage. I mean, the Blitz, there's one particular night of the Blitz which was completely the worst night, and this is what did most of the damage. I mean, the Gothic churches suffered terribly. So you can see here, this is sort of been taken off the top here, and if you look for a similar thing, this is all being rebuilt here. You can see these little marks here. Those at the top there, so it's sort of terrible damage. And just another sort of slightly depressing picture. The one thing is this big hall here is completely gone. I think this is called Pegasus Hall, and I actually did a little look to try and find a bit more history about it, and I couldn't, but there was a big hall right next to the Temple Church, right up until the Blitz, and then this was obviously demolished. And this is where you can see this is the round church here. Outside the Temple Church, on the north side of the Temple Church, these are Templar graves. The tombs inside the Temple Church are rank and file Templars. These rank and file Templars. I did get an archaeological report that was done ages ago. Somebody did an investigation when you could just about read what was on the graves. And somebody did an investigation and they found out they were a typical Templar, which would be the younger son, not somebody that didn't have, because you had this sort of primogeniture where the eldest son would inherit everything. And typical Templar knights would be, and typical Crusaders as well, would be sort of younger people without huge amounts of inheritance in this country or in Europe. and they would be the likely sort of Templar knights. And when they investigated one of these graves, that was exactly who it was. It was the younger son who had gone to the Crusades, fought, and he was buried here. And these were only recovered, I think these were exposed about 100 years ago, around the age of the Temple Church. This is the round church here. Inside, and you've got these the classic tombs in here, which were real big patrons of the Templars. They weren't actually Templars, although they might have joined briefly because it was very fashionable. And in the early life of the Templars, they were very fashionable and very positive. People felt about them, and donating a lot to the Templars and becoming an honorary Templar was great. And if you donated enough, you would possibly find yourself a tomb in here. So people like William de Grafton, who had lands in Yorkshire, is one of his tombs is here. This is in the interior of the Temple Church as well. This is the what's called the penitential cell, and this is directly opposite you as you go in. The penitential cell is called that because there was a legend, or there was Addison. You can get that that's online if you want to look. You can get I think it's free online, the History of the Knights Templars by Addison. Addison was a lawyer who worked in Lincoln's Inn, who did a long history of the Templars in 1842. But he mentions this Walter the Bachelor, who was the Grand Preceptor of Ireland, who was held in this penitential cell until he died, I guess starved to death. But there's some slight uncertainty about whether that's 100% true. But I mean, this is what it's known as. The other day when I was in the Temple Church, this door was open, so I popped up quickly. I did say that I was going to, and said that's okay. And I found this, which is fantastic. So this is as you go up. People don't normally go up here. This is this fantastic sort of little original two knights on one horse, which I guess is original because I don't think anybody would have redone it, after the Blitz. These are photos of the knights as they were pre the Blitz, and you can see they had this fantastic amount of detail in the tiles, I think, all of which has been lost after the Blitz. And these are the knights today damaged. This is William Marshall. You can also see, if you want to see these knights, and you can also see Roslin Chapel in the same place, if you go to the V&A in the cast room, there's a cast of Roslin Chapel, and there's also casts of the knights as they were pre the Blitz, so it's quite a nice place to go in the cast room. And they did have, in the Temple Church, they had a display with the knights from the V&A and the knights to compare them. Right, this is a picture which shows you how much painting there was up until the Blitz and things. It was all painted in the Temple Church, and here again you can see the painting. You can also see, this shows you how the pillars lean outwards. They sort of lean at an angle, which is quite strange. Can't quite work out why architecturally you would do that, but they did. And also the Temple Church in Bristol has the same feature. The pillars lean outwards, and this is how it looks today. And pillars as well. A couple more sites. This is Bisham Abbey in Berkshire, where the England football team used to train in the old days. They don't anymore, I don't think, but it's still a sports centre. It's on the Thames. It's used for transport. You can see from a property like this, very desirable, far more desirable than the Lincolnshire properties, which were left to ruin. This is a very desirable property, obviously, and it was taken over by the Hospitallers, and it was taken over by generations of monastic orders who made lots and lots of alterations. So you can see from the building how many alterations have been made. This is Bisham's just there. You can see just architecturally how many different bits and pieces have gone on here. This is Denny Abbey in Cambridgeshire. Again, this was taken over by the Hospitallers, and then some nuns, an order of nuns. Denny's up here, and there was a grave there where they found this pewter plate with a sort of a cross. I put this here because it's the same design, because this is a bit faint. Denny Abbey was a sort of retirement home for Templars, actually. That's why they were excavating, and it was a retirement home sort of for when they'd become old. And when they did little excavations in Denny Abbey, they found the skeletons had injuries and conditions that were consistent with fighting in the Crusades. You can see again, this has been really sort of altered along the way, and the original thing was a Templar church, and this is the outside wall of the Templar church. This is from the East End, and this is the arch, which would be the arch of the Templar church, and where I'm standing taking this picture would be the altar. There's still a couple of old Templars. These are old Templars helping each other around. It was a farm. Actually, it was a farmhouse for a long time, and people just lived there as a farmhouse. up until the 60s. This is Penhill on the Yorkshire Moors. Oh, I just put that in, I spotted one. This is Penhill on the Yorkshire Moors. This is a lovely place to visit. It's a temple. It was a preceptory. None of it's been excavated apart from the chapel, which is part of the on the route up and stuff, and it's just enclosed. It's up. Where is it? Up here. And it's a little bit of a walk from the main road. And again, they brought in things from outside and put them inside, such as this sarcophagus. It's a chapel, and here's the altar. There's a couple of very small niches here, which are a bit of a mystery, and nobody knows what they're for. They're just here, and it's difficult to tell. They were a part of the chapel. Nobody knows what went in there, whether it's a sword or whether it's bones of some sort. You've got these boundary markers that you can find in walls and things around in Yorkshire, around these preceptories, because they marked the tax-free land, and they're quite common. This is one by the road actually. There's a couple. This is another boundary marker. And that's one from the church. This is Dover, the little tiny round church in Dover, which was uncovered probably about 100 years ago. It's down there. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the King John, who completely messed up his relationship with the Pope, had to go and say sorry and tell him that so he went and submitted to the Pope, it wasn't the Pope, it was the sort of like his deputy, Cardinal Pandolf, and it was said that he was in the Templar church in Dover, which would be this little round church, which is quite an interesting idea of the king submitting, because he'd got the whole of the country excommunicated. So you couldn't bury people or marry people or whatever, so he had to go and say, make up. This is what he did, May 13. This is the church again. Temple Combe in Somerset. Temple Combe in Somerset was investigated by the Time team, and it's probably the worst Time team programme I've ever seen, because they actually completely messed it up, which was terrible, because they didn't ever do any more Templar sites. What happened was they were invited down by the guy that had bought the manor in Temple Combe, and he was convinced that his manor was a Templar manor, so they spent all the time investigating this Templar manor, and it wasn't. And when they actually looked at the map on the third day, they realised that the Templar manor wasn't actually in this tax-free land, the tithe land, or the tithe-free land, and so they realised that they were completely in the wrong place. But by that time it was too late, so unfortunately that was, I think it was about 97. Temple Combe was on the A303, or just off the A303 as you go down to the West Country. What Temple Combe does have, or did have, was this fantastic panel, which was discovered by Molly Drew. I found a picture of Molly Drew there. And she, I think it was during the war, there was an awful gale, and she went outside she lived in a very old house with an old thick bit was attached, and it was used as a place where the coal was and the wood was. So they had this terrible gale, and after the gale she went out to get some wood, and when she looked up she saw this figure looking down at her, and it was then given to the local clergy, who tried to clean it and things, and it wasn't a great success, but it was back in the church, and you can see that there. Why I say check before visit, because it's not actually in the church now, it's in the Bishop's Palace in Wells, and I'm not sure where it's going to be after that. So, as I say, if it's in the church, it's great, very easy to visit, but if it's not, sort of track it down. Obviously, there's sort of lots of ideas about what it might be. Probably the most popular or most plausible is the idea of St. Veronica's veil or St. Veronica's handkerchief, which was one of the stations of the cross, and it was also about St. Veronica was somebody who gave Jesus a bit of cloth on his way to the crucifixion, and when he returned it to St. Veronica, the image of Jesus was on the cloth, and you can see that the depictions of this cloth tend to involve corners which are sort of bunched up, and you can see this has sort of corners that are kind of bunched up. This is Temple in Cornwall, which is right down the bottom. This is a small little chapel. They didn't have a huge presence in Cornwall. This is right down there. Temple in Cornwall was called the Lawless Church because the Templars were outside of, as we said, the Templars were outside of local sort of jurisdiction. They didn't pay taxes. They weren't answerable to local clergy. And what happened with Temple in Cornwall is that nobody really bothered taking it over when the Templars had gone, so it continued on, a bit like Gretna Green, it continued on as being an independent church, which made it quite attractive to people that needed an independent church, such as these people who needed to be married and buried if you know, sort of criminals being buried and so on. So it had this sort of terrible sort of reputation. Well, it's obviously now it's a lovely reputation because it's a very nice place to visit. It fell down in a gale on the top of a tramp, unfortunately, a couple of hundred years ago, and it was ruined for a long time. If you look there, there's the font in the ruins of the church, and today it's been restored. Well, it was restored about 100 years ago, and there's the font back in its appropriate place. It's a lovely, it's a lovely area. It's quite a nice place to visit. This is the window at the end. Around Temple, you can find lots of these crosses, which normally would be called Cornish crosses, but I think they're actually Templar boundary crosses because they seem to be quite sort of consistent with the ones you'd find in Yorkshire. This is this is perhaps a Templar, but I don't know. But it's interesting. It's a Christianised prehistoric menhir. A couple of Templar hotels, if you wanted to go and stay in Templar places. If you see Angel in the name of a pub or a hotel, it tends to mean because it had a monastic association somewhere in its past. The Angel in Royal Grantham, which they've sort of tarted up a bit, it's quite posh now. But that was a Templar hostelry. Rothley Court in Leicestershire. If you go to reception, you can visit this as the Templar Chapel, which has some interesting bits and pieces in it. You get a Templar parking bay. And this is Sandford-on-Thames, which was a big preceptory. Actually, I haven't got a photo, but actually, if you see this from a distance, it looks like a preceptory. They kind of built the whole hotel in the same sort of style. So this is the original. This is the original Templar building here. This is slightly later. Just above, just there, you've got this nice Templar cross, which is good, it's the original. And you've also got this strange figure 8 as well, which I had a figure 8 before, but it's another figure 8. Galway. For some reason, when I've talked about Templars, I haven't really included Galway, and I was quite surprised. I don't know why, because Galway's great. So I just do a bit about Galway. Galway's in Herefordshire on the borders, and it's a really lovely place. Here. And visited by Jacques de Molay. There was a sort of legend of Jacques de Molay, who was the last Grand Master of the Templars, actually came and visited Galway with a reason. It's sort of like more of a legend than a documented fact, but there's no reason why it shouldn't. So you've got a big tower, fortified tower. A bit similar to some of the Irish places have this as well. But you've got, I think these were separate at one point. You've got this fortified tower. It was at one time a prison for locals. It's quite sort of, it feels quite a sort of sacred site as well, because you've got Holy Well, which is down here as well. The whole site's quite sort of, has lots of things going on. But the outer church is just fascinating. There was a round church here. There's a couple of shots really. There was a round church here, and these are the foundations of the round church. So it's quite a substantial round church, which the Templars then demolished and then built the squarer church. You've got a little plaque here that says Foundations of the Round Church, I suppose 1927. This is a plan from the church. You can see these are the bits of the round church, and what's remaining are these blue bits from the original Templar church. And this is the Galway Green Man, is just here, which I'll show later in a minute. This is the south chapel, so it's got a variety of dates. So, if you look above where this is the north wall, and if you look above where the foundations of the round church are, you've got these sort of strange symbols which have been incorporated in the fabric of the newer church. This seems to be sort of like the hand reaching down from above. We've got crosses etched on the wall, and we're kind of going around the church, sort of left from the north wall. So we're walking around now. Got this cross, another cross, a Maltese cross, a swastika. The swastika's going around the Hindu way. Not the Nazis reversed it, but this is the sort of clockwise flow. If you see what I mean? Is this the Hindu way? We've got another sort of patriarchal cross, another cross, Lamb of God, Agnus Dei, and then you've got a T and a K, which could be Knights Templars, and you've got another sort of 8 kind of figure, and a kind of a griffin. So we've kind of gone around the church, and now we're coming to the entrance, which is would be the west entrance, and the east end onto that. So you've got the original arch of Galway here. One thing in Galway is this reusing of slabs, grave slabs, which is the whole church seems to have been recycled perpetually. Here you've got, I presume this is a Templar, because this is an old part of the church. So if this was recycled, looks like it was a Templar grave slab which has been reused as a lintel. I had to exaggerate the photo so you can see where it is. Another one here, reused grave slab in an old part of the church. This is the piscina, which is in what they call the Templars' Chapel. And you've got this strange fish and a sort of an eel or something, and a bit of a hieroglyphic thing here. So we're not sure what's going on there. There you go. It's all very mysterious, but it's quite nice. People have made various suggestions, none of which really crack it, I don't know. This could be a lamprey, which was a popular food at the time, a medieval food that they would have in New Ponds, a little eel. So this is what they say, South Chapel, and it's in this chapel the Templars were initiated into their order, probably. So this is the South Chapel, and the piscina's just there. So if you look behind you from where this picture's taken, above the door you have the Arma Christi, which is etched into the door, and somebody's helpfully, well I visited anyway, penciled them in. So you've got a spear, a ladder, nails, cross, crown, staff, sponge, and something else. But they're the sort of the implements of the Passion. So this is the original arch from the round church, which is the one feature in Galway which has already been there. And this is what we're looking at here, is this strange green man. You've got these interesting capitals, and this is the Galway Green Man. The Galway Green Man is quite similar to another sort of Hereford school, of what they call the Hereford Romanesque school, which of Kilpeck, which is quite close, is a typical example. This is not a Templar church, this is Kilpeck, and this is a great example of sort of Hereford Romanesque, where you've got these green men, which are slightly similar, like this one. The Galway Green Man has horns and things, and so people have talked about Sononis and various sort of pagan deities. There you go. So that's the other side of the arch. And yeah, then you've got the roof, which is lovely, and bits and pieces on the walls, across there. And you've got this strange font, which is strange. It's octagonal again. It's 8-sided. And where I've taken this picture from, you can see obviously you've got a descending snake, which is another strange symbol. But actually, you can't see the snake at all, because where I've taken the picture from is actually a wall. So if you look at that font, it's quite difficult to see this snake, because it's right against the wall. And what I've done is kind of got my camera and done that to take this picture. But if you're actually looking casually, you don't actually see the snake at all, which is quite strange to have it around the back of the font. Again, down the road, just next to it, you've got the Templar dovecote. We know this is Templar because it was restored. This just here. It was restored by a man who said, this is an inscription here, and just after the Templars were suppressed, there's an inscription there that says, I restored this dove, I am brother so and so, and I restored this dovecote. So it was obviously there at the time of the Templars. And this is the dovecote has 666 nesting boxes. But and these were a few of them. Right. Just quickly, I'm going to really quickly do a few bits about the decline, and then we'll be on the hour mark and have a break. Decline for all the Templars, places to visit. One of the things about Templars, and I didn't really have a proper analogy, but the Templars were a bit like we now view people like Google and Amazon, because they were able to pay taxes when and where they wanted. And they were kind of like this multinational companies. And when they first started, like Google was, when Google first started, you thought, yeah, they're really there for me. And then after, I mean, obviously the Templars were in existence for 200 years, which is a long time. But it's a bit like people's viewpoint, that the Crusades had been less successful and they'd lost Jerusalem and things had gone wrong, and so the actual reason for the Templars, and people had to still pay taxes to the Templars, and people were still required to be paying taxes for the Crusades. So they lost a lot of their goodwill. You had the Battle of Hattin, which featured in the Kingdom of Heaven movie, and I don't know if you remember that, but that was a complete disaster where pretty much all the Templars were captured, a lot of Templars were captured, and they weren't ransomed. The Templars wouldn't be ransomed because they didn't. The normal thing for a normal knight would be to ransomed, and if you killed a normal knight, people would be very upset because they were normally worth a lot of money. The Templars made that very clear. Nobody would ever pay any ransom for a Templar, and so they were generally executed because they didn't really have anything else to do with them. Because you didn't want to let them go because they'd come back and you regret it. So after the Battle of Hattin, Saladin had all the Templars beheaded. And to do the beheading, he got a bunch of visiting academics, or Sufis they were, but it was kind of like somebody said it was like an in-joke almost to get these Sufis to behead Templars because they were the last person that was trained to behead people. So that's Battle of Hattin, complete disaster. The lands in the Middle East, the Holy Land was lost, Jerusalem was lost, and then over a period of about 100 years, you had the Battle of Hattin in 1187, Jerusalem's lost shortly after that, and then the Crusaders' territories sort of pushed back to the sea. And Acre here is the last place that's left, and that finally falls. What happens is you have the Crusaders then decamp over to Cyprus, and you have the Lusignan dynasty that's in the Kingdom of Heaven. You have Guy de Lusignan, who's the baddie, but he actually founded a dynasty on Cyprus, and he was like the government in waiting to go back to the Crusades, to go back to Jerusalem. It never happened. And this is in Cyprus. This is the Kingdom of Jerusalem shield kind of thing. I was trying to find out I was trying to search in Nicosia to see if I could find where Guy de Lusignan's buried. I think I know where the church is, and I think but I need to go and investigate a bit more. This shows you how well people are getting on, because this is a hospital chapel and a Templar chapel next to each other, because they have been sort of forced to go and live in, this is Famagusta in Cyprus, and they've had to go and live in Cyprus together. It's interesting that Jacques de Molay, the head Grand Master of the Templars, actually refused a merger with the Hospitallers being the other big military knightly order at the same time. The Hospitallers had a lot more. The Templars were purely to fight the Crusades, purely to generate money, to keep the Crusades going, purely to sort of, they had that real raison d'etre to just keep the Crusades going, to occupy the land in Jerusalem. The Hospitallers were originally caring for pilgrims and had that, as the name suggests, and then they became militarised. The Hospitallers were quite canny, as that they developed their territories quite well, and they had the island of Rhodes. And if the Hospitallers were then able to go and live on the island of Rhodes and completely go over there when things got a bit dodgy. The Templars owned Cyprus for a while, but they gave it up. And in some books, I think Malcolm Barber says that one of the tragedies of the Templars is they could have made Cyprus a Templar state and just gone there, but they didn't. So the Templars are arrested in 1307 in France. They're all arrested. Elsewhere, they're not all arrested, and everyone has prior notice, so they can all clear off if they want to. The UK Templars were prepared. This is Lincoln, where they were held in Lincoln Castle. Some of them in the local areas, being that the big preceptories were around Lincolnshire and Yorkshire, they were held in Lincoln and York. This shows you that William de la Mort was the Grand Preceptor of England, and he was arrested at Temple Brewer. But for the first period of their arrests, they were allowed to wander around as much as they liked. They weren't kept, because people say, oh, where did the Templars go and what happened? There's all this mystery. But they actually, outside of France, they were pretty much allowed to do what they want for the first bit. It got a bit more difficult as the time went on, but they were in prison for a number of years. And so William de la Mort, this is where they were held. This is the Lincoln place where they were held. And there's graffiti on the walls, which is to do with it appears to have been done by the Templars, which is the sort of classic stepped cross design. And you can visit this obviously visit Lincoln and see these things, other bits and pieces of graffiti with a religious sort of theme. And this is Christopher Clum's Saint Christopher. That would have been remarkable. This is Saint Christopher with little Jesus on his shoulder here. And then later on they were tried in Lincoln Cathedral. This is in Lincoln, but similar things were going on. They were arrested in Cyprus, Ireland, Scotland, Lincoln, York, wherever there's, and they were held locally. This is Chapter House, which is featured in the Da Vinci Code, as it doubled for Westminster Abbey, but this is where the Templars were tried and examined, and there's a thing on the wall. Warwick Castle, again, they were held. Again, you get similar graffiti on the walls where they were held, step crosses in sort of, usually on the eastern end, you know, because the altar bit is. Again, it's a graffiti from carvings from Warwick. This is Warwick Castle, which brings me on to the octagonal eightfold structure, which is Royston Cave, which is very mysterious. You've got, this is Royston Cave is below this manhole here, so that's the if you went straight down, that's where Royston Cave, and that's the entrance to Royston Cave here. That's where this guy's opening it up for me. But that's where it is, so it's interesting. So you've got this octagonal structure. Royston Cave is debatable whether it's, but it's quite consistent with other Templar carvings elsewhere, and so it may have been a place where they were holed up for a while. Royston Cave is a great place to visit if you've never been there. These are carvings from elsewhere. I got this guy sent them to me. And these are carvings from southwest France, similar carvings as well. These were prisons as well, where the Templars were held, so you've got the similar sort of things going on. And Chinon, where the Grand Masters were all held, and the main order was held in France. Again, you've got these step crosses and so on. So Royston Cave is sort of consistent with that. Royston Cave was lost for a long time. It was rediscovered in about 1720. It was lost. Nobody knew it was there. And then they're in the market. And some of the old women in the market who sold cheese wanted to... they got old enough to want a seat. And they didn't want to stand up anymore, so they cleared away so they could sit down. And when they cleared away, they found a millstone. And that's where and then below the millstone was the cave. And it had been undiscovered for hundreds of years, since medieval times. These were the charges. In the UK, these were the only ones that people admitted to, because that meant you kind of got let off, and they went and then were able to go and do pensions elsewhere. They didn't admit to anything else. This was kind of a plea bargaining. Right, quickly, All Hallows by the Tower. It's by the Tower as a church. This is where some of them were examined towards the end of the trials. William de la Mort was the guy I mentioned. He was arrested in Lincoln, and he was held in Lincoln, but he was the main man for the Templars. So he came to All Hallows, and he made this speech saying, the Templars are innocent of all these things, and you're all wrong, and we believe the Holy Church, and so on. We're basically saying we're Orthodox Catholics, and we don't believe it. William de la Mort refused to agree to anything. So no, he was said that he was held he died in the Tower, but nobody really knows what happened to him. There was no record of his death. There's no place of burial for him, so that's a bit of a mystery. And most of the British Templars were freed after a light penance, and then went to do pension elsewhere. This is it. Beneath the All Hallows, but in All Hallows, if you go to the crypt, there's this altar which was taken from the chapel of Richard the Lionheart in the Templar Church of Amplet, which was brought over by the Templars. So there was quite a lot of symbolic resonance with him making this speech in the place that's just above this altar. And obviously in France they met with a completely different fate, where people like Jacques de Molay were burnt, and the Templars, the Templars in France, due to the king there and the king's ambition to get the Templars wealth and jealousy and various political things, they met with a very different fate. Elsewhere, not sure. So I'll stop there for a break, because I've gone on for an hour, and then I'll tell you about this mysterious correspondence about Ireland, which is, if that's okay. Just before, I just say Barry is here. Barry works with Pamela Willis at the St John's Gate and the St John's Museum. The Knights of St John were the are now the modern version of the Knights Hospitallers, and their history goes back to the Siege of Malta, Iron Roads, and back into Templar history. If anybody's interested in doing any research, and I used the St John's Gate Museum and Library for researching for this book, of which there's 3 copies left on sale, but they are a phenomenal resource because they have the records of the hospitallers going back, and they also have things like people's dissertations that may have been done 40 or 50 years ago relating to the same knightly orders and so on. So and actually the St John's Gate is where Shakespeare rehearsed some of his plays in the panelled room there, so you can actually consult documents, make friends of actually the people that were doing research at the same time as me. I'm still friends with, and they're in Australia and things like that. So St John's Gate and the Knights Hospital, the St John's Museum, it's a small place, but it is a fantastic resource, and they do have anyway. So a few people said to me, "Isn't that was a great, sensible presentation about the Templars? I'm great you didn't include all that fanciful, mysterious stuff." Well, I'm probably going to lose all of those people now because as I said, there was a lady at the beginning of the year sort of started corresponding with me and sending me enormous amounts of information, and over a period of about a couple of months, I must have had emails 24 hours a day, and it was all about Ireland. And really, she was very pleasant, and she wanted me to sort of just see if I could think of any other examples or have any sort of thoughts about various stuff. And she was quite into genealogy, and she was also to do with Ireland. And so it's very pleasant, and she was very nice. But then after 2 months, no contact whatsoever, didn't respond to any more emails. We didn't fall out, as far as I can tell, but nothing whatsoever, which is fair enough because I do have sort of periodic correspondence with people. And it was very pleasant. And actually, she motivated me to go over to Ireland and do a bit of my own research. She motivated me to go do things like I went up to St John's Gate and looked at the history of the hospitallers in Ireland and photographed a lot of documents up there. So that was great. So that was very pleasant. So I have no ill feeling or anything towards it. It's interesting. Anyway, what did she tell me? There you go. This is this is on the Hook in Ireland. This is South Island. This is a known Templar area. That photo was taken, it's here. This is the Hook Peninsula and it's known Templar properties. Why I've shown this is because it shows the south of Ireland is quite a good place for access to and from things like ports in the south of England, also ports here, just to give you an idea. For this talk, what I've done is put together various things that she mentioned. So this is a bit loose and it's kind of a work in progress. So in terms of Templar history, why has Ireland been ignored? Well, the current view is that the Templars did have a few properties, such as the one I've just shown you. But there were small numbers and there were a few post-trial. The lack of Templar archaeology, there's very little archaeology being done in Ireland. Templar locations like Rincrew, which I'll show you in a minute, have never been excavated, although they're known to be Templar. The Blackwater River has Templar connections up and down, and this hasn't been excavated, although there's a few more things happening there. But also in Ireland, because of the lack of records, and records in terms of Templar history generally, there aren't any. There were records apparently in Cyprus, Paris, lots of places, they've all been lost. The records in Ireland have also been lost. So the Hospitallers have quite a big presence in Ireland, but you don't know whether that presence was inherited from the Templars or whether it was original Hospitallers after the suppression. Right. So problem separated nice hospital. That's why I went to St John's Gate to look at some stuff there. Lack of documentation, yes. English scholars in recent years, such as Helen Nicholson, point out quite rightly that a barbaric island has been ignored because it's not it hasn't been a particularly. Most people are interested in Paris, the general sort of European spread of the knightly orders. Ireland always seems a bit of a strange place. It did to me. In fact, somebody asked me, and this is another point, somebody asked me after I did this book whether I could think about doing a Templar one on Ireland. At the time, I really couldn't find a huge amount of evidence to make it to sort of sustain doing a whole book. But there's a lot more, and that was a little while ago, but there's a lot more stuff around now, of which this lady points me in the direction of. If you go over to Ireland, which is great, but there is huge amounts of ruins, and there aren't many records. It's a bit like the reverse of England, where there's lots of records and we know what the ruins are. In Ireland, there's lots of ruins which are quite vague about their thing. Evidence, right? This is interesting. For this talk, I did a kind of like a little sort of generate a bit of information. I thought to say one of the things that, and this is from Helen Nicholson, who's an academic. The Irish Grand Master William of Warren, he was spared interrogation. He was never interrogated, which is very strange. And you think, well, why would you not? Because everyone was demanded. People like William de la Moor in England, obviously Jacques de Molay, all the Grand Masters. The Irish one individually was spared, said, we're not going to bother with you. And he was paid a pension to at least 1312, which is after the arrests, by other Templars. And Helen Nicholson also mentions that the Templars in Ireland did see themselves as sort of a separate area. She also mentions that family connections may have provided protection, which is again interesting because you're thinking, well, it didn't provide protection anywhere else. Why is it in Ireland that they were able to really assert themselves? The Irish Templars were known to have strong trading connections with Bristol and Bordeaux. There's this phrase about the Norman assimilation in Ireland which says that they became more Irish than the Irish themselves. Well, if you just translate, if you said the Templars became more Irish than the Irish themselves, you can almost see that they kind of like were absorbed into Ireland, if there was more than we thought. As a historical tradition in which Ireland acts as a refuge for those fleeing persecution. In Ireland, it's very notable that there's these huge rivers which still exist, and places like the Blackwater are navigable right into, right miles and miles and miles into Ireland, which in medieval times would have been a great, they're a real advantage. If you can move huge amounts of stuff around using the rivers, and as they use the Thames in London, it really, really helps. And two Templars particularly, we know these guys went to Ireland because they came back again. And they said, we fled to Ireland, but we decided to come back because we realised that we just have to do a bit of penance. Their names are Stephen de Stapelberg and Thomas de Lindsay. De Lindsay would be Lincolnshire because de Lindsay is a place in Lincolnshire. So he obviously came, Lincolnshire would be the place he came to. From Lincolnshire, he fled to Ireland. Then he decided to go back to Lincolnshire to do a bit of penance, and that was all okay. Right. The big thing that's a sort of stumbling block about looking at Ireland with in terms of temple is the name temple in Ireland is always said to be related to the Gaelic word temple, which means church. So if any of these are all these are sort of temple place names, okay? So previously, it's always been said that temple is a Gaelic word, it means church. So any idea that it has anything to do with the Templars, is wrong. It's interesting to note that it was only up until 100 years ago or so when the English temple name was sort of proven and demonstrated to be associated with the Templars. So there's a kind of a bit of a precedent for this. So as you can see, if you just look at this, you can see that the temple place name has roughly, it's sort of towards the sort of southern, eastern end of Ireland. And again, these are the ones in England, these are the temple place names in Ireland. Now, this is something this lady pointed out. This, in 1300, when the Templars were suppressed, these are the Gaelic-speaking parts of Ireland. These are the land held by native Gaelic-speaking Irish. This, brown land, is the land of the French-speaking Normans. So, if the temple place name came from Gaelic, you would expect it to be definitely in the Gaelic-speaking areas. But if you put these two maps over each other, they show you that the temple place names are all in the Norman areas, and actually in the Gaelic-speaking areas, there's none, if a few. And even if you look in this little bit here, you've got two Gaelic-speaking areas, no temple place names, and they just follow this little Norman occupied area here. So it seems quite clearly that the temple place name is not to do with the Gaelic word, it's to do with something else. It might not be Templar, but it's a French, it comes from the French language, the Norman held areas have got this. I'm just going to run through a few. These are the. This is something this lady sent me. This will give you a bit of. This is kind of like one email, okay? So here we go. Temple place name's an island. There you go. And she's obviously very, very thorough because she attaches notes to all of them. So there you go, 152. So about 152 notes. And this is another point she made. This is interesting as well, because you would think, well, okay, the Templars remain in Ireland, and you think, well, if they're going to remain in Ireland and they're sort of untouchable in Ireland, what you'd expect to happen? Well, you'd expect the families that supported the Templars, that you knew supported the Templars, would they prosper? And in fact, they do. Late medieval history shows that all the families that supported the Templars in Ireland expanded, and families like the St. Ledgers, who we know for the horses now and things, and these known families start to expand and start to do very well. So their actual patronage and support of the Templars seem to be a very prosperous thing to do, or advantageous thing to do, and Ireland seems to be really sort of prospering. This figure 8, this is something else that was pointed out, this figure 8, the sort of infinity symbol. This is one from Portugal on a grave in a Templar church, which is another infinity symbol. This was quite strange, because when I went over to Ireland, because I say this lady was corresponding with me was a bit imaginative, I thought, at times, and I was thinking, well, and she pointed out all these things. She said, oh, you get these Templar places, you get signs like this. Look, there's a figure 8, a double knot. And then you've got these Lismore Estates, which is again a Templar property. You've got the sign for Lismore Estates is again this sort of double knot. So, and then you get glasses from the Lismore Estates, and again they got this double knot on, and it's all. Anyway, I went up to Ireland, so I was driving around, and I got my GPS, and sort of like saying, just sort of stopping at the first place I stopped at was Church of Ireland, church called Temple Tree, and up on the thing again you have this sign which I've done there. And also the interesting thing, I don't want to lose half my audience again, but the interesting thing is that double knot goes into Masonic. It's very prevalent in Masonic law with the double knot, this figure of 8 knot. If you look at, like here, this is Mozart, magic flute, Masonic thing, double knot all around. This is a Masonic thing, double knot all around. So. Right, so I went over to Ireland and I visited some sites. This is Temple Brighton near Cork, which is a fantastically powerful site. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that it's all definitely Templar. It has a standing stone in the middle of this chapel. It's down about here. Yeah, about here. It's got a stone circle near it, and it's this chapel with a standing stone in the middle, and it's just the ruins of the chapel, really. It's interesting. You've got the standing stone that's been kept within it. This is Morn Abbey, which is definitely Templar because they're excavating. It's another thing that's happened is that if you look at local history, present local archaeological investigations of local history in Ireland is revealing more Templar. Because if you talk to people locally, this has just been recently excavated, and they're saying it is Templar now. There's so many ruins. I was saying that in Ireland there are so many ruins, but not many records. So it's quite good for that. So yeah, Morn Abbey, built 1199 by the Knights Templars in County Cork. So this is a current investigation. Ring Crew, this is established Templar site, which is mentioned by academics as being Templar, and so on. It's never been excavated. It's here. It's a bugger to get to. You have to stop. I mean, if you have to climb up this little load of trees. It's up on a hill, and you have to climb up the trees, through the bushes and the trees, and then come out over a fence, and then you actually get to it. I must be able to make it. It's an easier way, but yeah, it's just there, and next to Youghal, and this is the interior of these buildings. This is Temple Michael, which is just up the road from it. It's just here. Well, it's actually the actual church is on the banks of the river here. Again, and these are the huge rivers. It stays this sort of width way up into the island. It's got a castle next to it. And this lady said, "Oh, look at this. Go to this tomb. Look at this thing." And they said, "You'll see Templar crosses." And, well, I don't know. Really. I mean, you see crosses like that on a lot, whether they're Templar or not. This is Ballyhack, which is on the Hook Peninsula down south, just here. This tower. I'm not sure whether the tower may not be Templar, but you've got. This is definitely Templar because it's got a Templar pub there, so it must be. And yeah, this is Templar Town, which is Templar Land, which is down here. And you've got this old building. It's difficult to know whether the actual building, what parts of the building may be medieval, but I mean, most of it looks a little later. Templar flags. And this was another thing, we talked about this sort of figure eight and the idea of eight, and this is Askerton. Askerton is known to be Templar. This isn't my picture, it's from the Stanley Stone, which is an Irish site. But Askerton is known to be Templar, and you have these octagonal towers. So this lady was saying to me, well, what about other octagonal towers? They're on Templar areas as well, and maybe they're. So, I mean, maybe, you never know. I mean, I've shown that before, but this is, the octagonal design. Sorry, these are a couple of more examples. This is the octagonal interior of the Tomar Charloria, I think they call it. It's the HQ of the Templars, and it has this octagonal. It's an octagonal building, an octagonal thing. These are I think this is Spain, and that's France. These are octagonal. These are Templars. All this is Templar, definitely Templar. Which are octagonal. So the lady said, well, what about the other places? So this is in Stiog, which is, again, you have these type of octagonal towers. And this is the original. You see, it's very difficult, you don't know, because these are usually the oldest part of the building, and the records for the actual creation of the tower are unknown. People can't tell you really. They can tell you the later dates, but the original date for this. This is in Stiog again. Knocktofer, which is quite close, another octagonal tower. That's an older picture. What's there? Knocktofer again, and then during the trip, I mean, because what I did is I put all these sort of sites onto a GPS and just let the GPS work out the easiest thing to go to, because I was driving by myself. So I went to this place, and St Mary's Church in Garan, which is here, and it's a lovely place, fantastic bits and pieces in it, as you can see. So I met this guy who was a guide there, and a lady who was with him. And I said, I'm just looking at the Templars. Oh, Templars, yes, this is here. You're Templars. We've got Templars here. I said, really? He says, yeah, we did some recent investigation that shows that, and he said that they have these tomb lids. He said, these are Templar tomb lids. And we've just found them, which is great, because it kind of confirmed what I thought, or what this lady thought. He said this was the sort of Templars chapel, or these were Templar dedicated niches unfortunately, because I probably need to I'd like to go back actually and sort of do more work and actually sort of firm up a lot of this, because people when I've asked local people doing investigations, they've been quite positive that they feel that there are Templar connections, but it'd be better to sort of get a bit of written evidence and things really. But it's quite exciting. And he also pointed out these I don't know what these are, but he's pointed out pentagrams going up the side of the chapel. But, I don't know. That's the same place. And just lastly, just to finish off, this was Lowhort, which is there. Yeah, I'll put a little arrow here. Lowhort's there. And I didn't actually do this. I got this from a map or something, and actually somebody's put a Templar cross on it, which is useful. But this is fascinating, because, we were investigating this when she broke off contact with me, so it's good, appropriate I finish with it. So either she found some great secret here, or I don't know. But this tower is in the middle of there, and this is sort of like an octagonal structure with a similar orientation to the Dome of the Rock, slightly sort of up northeast, or northeast, isn't it? So this is in the centre. We were talking to the guy who somebody had recently brought it, and they were doing some surveys of it, and they were saying, yes, we found this Templar thing and that Templar thing. I think it was all getting very positive with them. That was the last I heard. But this, yes, as I say, it's an interesting place. So I think it's sort of work in progress. And that's the end of my Irish story, really. I mean, it's a work. I am on Facebook. If anybody has any ideas, I'm quite happy to chat to people or do further investigation into it. But certainly the Irish story sounds quite promising and also very exciting, really. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for an absolutely ace talk. Really appreciate that. I'm just having a look at your answers. I think we have enough time for, let's say, 10 minutes worth of questions.
Okay.
Has anybody got? Would you like to?
Simon, a comment on the question. As I said in the break, fabulous to hear us talk about the Templars with no bollocks. I'm sure you, like I've been wheeled out so many times to refute the crap which is spread around about the Templars discovering treasure under the Templar Solomon tunnels in Dover. No evidence whatsoever, and the heresy and Mary Magdalene and all the usual crap. Thank you for not including any of that whatsoever. That's a delight. And fascinating talk. The question I have is, you showed a map about a third of the way through the second section of Ireland and Britain. Nothing at all in Wales or the North West. Any reason at all why?
I mean, going back to your first bit that you said, I mean, the Templars were quite keen on relics, because all Crusaders were keen on relics. So whether the Templars were looking for relics, if they weren't, I mean, it'd be unusual, because one of the reasons for a lot of the first Crusaders thought that they could sort of contain, and relics were quite powerful things, and so it would be unusual, but they, like I say, the idea that that was their reason for being there, and that they were mining and they were fascinated. The reason for the Welsh, there is Madoc, is it? There's one Templar property in Wales. One of the reasons is that they were quite unruly areas, and you're not long after 1066 and the sort of the occupation. So the areas that they really liked were the sort of Lincolnshire and Yorkshire, great expanses of arable and farmland they could really generate huge amounts of profit from. And they did get, there are some, if you go up, there's obviously some in Scotland, there's Templar in Scotland, which is a property, but there aren't that many, and if they're there, they're quite small. They're little properties where there's just a little house or something, or they had a concern. You know, the Templars were keen to make money from anything, so like they would run a pub, or they would do bits and pieces, you know, just to generate so they'd use the local economy. So if there was a small concern going, maybe they would sort of like use that. But
so they'd concentrate on places where there was wealth that they might be able
to
very
much so
from,
yeah.
Rather than the Celtic sort of areas which were fairly poor, and in comparison to the Northern French areas, fairly primitive.
And they also that they would have problems with the locals being a bit boisterous as well. So it would be difficult to operate a feudal system if people were a bit rebellious.
Yeah.
As I say, you've got Cornwall, you've got Madoc, I think, in Wales. You've got a couple of areas in the northeast, but they're all quite small. Leeds, places like that. They're not huge.
Thank you.
So they captured all of Jerusalem, the Nice area, what were some of their other activities once they've done that? Achieve the whole ship converting people?
Well, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, but then you had this period of where it's a bit unstable. But you didn't really have huge amounts of people. Nobody was organised, because you had this rabble capturing Jerusalem, but nobody was really organised in terms of any offence or thing. So the Templars then came into being about 20 years after that, when they realised that the resistance was getting a bit stronger. So you needed someone to sort of like a proper army to sort of go against that resistance and protect the pilgrims coming to and fro. So that was really their whole purpose initially. But out of that, kind of exponentially spread a whole load of other ways of protecting pilgrims and protecting the Holy Land, protecting Jerusalem. So really everything came from, if you said your mission is to protect Jerusalem, protect pilgrims, and keep Jerusalem in the hands of the Crusaders, the kingdom of heaven and earth, well then you can take that and use that and say, yes, if we create a huge estate in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire and generate huge funds, that actually fulfills that mission. It's kind of like an expansion. But also they obviously were very good at fighting, which is something I didn't really touch on. They started training. They were hugely skilled. They're very good at horse, developing cavalry. They're very skilled, fit, and they wouldn't leave the battlefield. They would fight, they would fight to the death, and that was just one of the things. It was a real. They were absolutely fanatical is probably stronger, but they were hugely organised and hugely purposeful. So, and this is why they terrified everyone, and this is why, say, 15 Templars was in Cyprus. There was only 15 Templars that ran the whole island, pretty much. And when things got difficult, when they asserted themselves, they caused mayhem. And they trained a lot. I mean, most of the properties in England would be looked after. Wouldn't be looked after by knights. They'd be looked after by retainers and so on, because you wouldn't want your knights hanging around in England. You want your knights on the battlefield. And they had castles in the Middle East where they sort of operated, but they were feared, really feared. But then what happened was, as it happens in all these situations, is Saladin then became hugely functionally effective as well, because they sort of developed each other. They weren't really converting people. They got people in. They brought people in who were often sort of younger members of a family, younger sons, people who wanted to devote themselves. You'd have to be hugely disciplined. It's a bit of a decision, because it's not taken lightly. Whereas other knights, you see, at the time were into, having long hair. The Templars never had long hair. All the discovery, if you look at the history channels and things like that, they all got long hair. The Templars had short hair, and they looked like bikers, and they didn't wash. I mean, that's one of the things. This is a fact. I mean, they didn't like washing. They kept their underwear on pretty much all the time, and they were into sort of like real self-denial. They shaved their heads and had long, straggling beards. So they didn't look like floating around.
When you put those list of names up, I noticed it said Decorsi. It sounded a bit like the stuff. Someone been in the newspapers about. Seems a bit dubious about all these names recurring and Oxford and Cambridge.
Well, you think they're sort of like the ruling elite?
Yeah.
I think
you said families, Templar families. I mean, how could they be? They couldn't really have Templar families, could they? Or could they?
Well, they could, but you'd be a patron of the Templars. This is, these families would sort of become real big Templar patrons, and sort of they would both prosper from each other's sort of patronage. And certainly some of the families, the big families like the de Lacys and people like that, who were very much involved with the Templars, seem to do very well out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to sort of go beyond my knowledge, because things like genealogy and post-Templar development isn't really something I know a huge amount about, but it does seem to sort of make sense.
It sounds a bit like what this fellow was saying in the newspapers recently, about these names, because you actually said about the Norman areas and the Gaelic areas. And, he's saying these Norman names are the well-to-do people,
Certainly in Ireland, they seem to really sort of establish themselves, and I think it's worthy of further research, really.
Didn't they also escort some of these families across the Holy Lands?
Yes, I mean that was something where, yes, they did. They operated a great travel agency because because going again, what you were saying about they wanted to protect Jerusalem and they wanted to protect it from pilgrims. One of the missions would be if you were a wealthy man and you lived in Lincolnshire, if you gave the Templars enough money, they would transport you. They had Templar ships, Templar hostelries. Somewhere like in Rochester, there's a little house that used to be a Templar hotel to stay on the way to the Holy Land and make you. So the Templars could escort you all the way, and then what they do is, as you probably know, is that they have this sort of like banking system where you can cash your, because that was the other thing, to protect pilgrims. The reason pilgrims got raided was because pilgrims were like wildebeest. They used to carry all their goods with them. You know, they used to have everything, so they were such attractive targets for these people that would want to ambush them. They weren't necessarily, when you talk about the pilgrims getting ambushed, it wasn't necessarily Islamic forces who were doing it. It was just general ne'er-do-wells who were seeing rich Europeans riding across the desert, thinking like, well, I'll raid them and sell half of them into slavery and take what they've got. So if you could develop a system where they didn't have any money on them, which is what the Templars did, where you'd have a check system, an IOU from the preceptory, maybe in London you'd get an IOU from the preceptory in London, and then you could cash it in Jerusalem. That was great because it made you a far less attractive prospect for the bandits. Yeah, so yes, they did transport, and they had the Templar ships, they rented ships, and then they had their own fleet. And so they were quite. I mean, if you look at in Portugal and Spain, they went into, after the Templars were suppressed, all the Templars went into the Knights of Christ, and then they had Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and you can see that as a logical extension of the Templar skills that they were developing when they were sort of expanded. Thanks.
Do you know, you're talking about the one Templars going to Ireland, and do you know whether they were going over as early as the last days of the last Irish kings, or was it all post Strongbow in the 70s?
And probably a little bit pre-Strongbow, because I think they established places like Wexford right on the south coast. There was, I think they were established pre-Strongbow, but then the big Strongbow invasion, that's when they sort of really got going. But as I say, it's all a bit unclear because it hasn't really been investigated, usually with the Templar.
Are there any records of tunnels in London?
Good question. There is, are there? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. There's tunnels just about everywhere else, and I don't know whether there are any in Paris either.
There might be, but there might be trains running.
Yeah, well, it could have been.
Lead up to the London Forces Society talking. Templars seem right.
There is there's Templars in the Templar, the ghost of the Templar. No, I don't. I mean, there are definitely Templar tunnels in places like Acre where they've rediscovered, and there's like a kilometre-long tunnel in Acre, which goes from the Templar castle to the port, and that you can visit that nowadays, so that's a fact. Other Templar tunnels, as I say, legends all over the place. Might be able to think of a few more, but I can't off the top of my head at the moment.
I was just curious that you didn't mention Roslyn. Is that just because it's had so much coverage elsewhere, or because it needs a book in itself?
Well, it doesn't really have any direct connection with the Templars, other than. William Sinclair designed Roslyn, was a member of a Spanish order that had Templars that went into it originally, but it's such a sort of tenuous link. But I like Roslyn. I've been there a few times, but it doesn't really have any it's 30 Roslyn. I can't remember. It's 14 something, isn't it? But it's well after the Templars were suppressed, so it doesn't. I mean. If there's any connection, it's just, I think it's very vague.
So you just put it on the map because people are interested in it?
Oh, I'll put it on my map because, it was interested and I liked sort of going there and sort of investigating it. It's a fascinating place, itself. But I don't think there's any sort of direct connection with the Templars as they existed up until when they were suppressed 1314 or 1320. But having said that this things I talked about Ireland actually seem to suggest some sort of continuation.
One last question.
Given the timing, I'm just interested in on your map where the Templars are not. There's nothing in Oxford. Alfred's Reading, Bury St Edmunds.
The map that's in the book
Yeah.
is the map of visitable places.
Yeah.
The temple places. There's a lot more. I mean, there are Oxford has Temple Cowley,
Okay.
where is it Temple Cowley? Yeah, which is so there are far more. I mean, those the things in the book are where places there are places to visit today, and the places that I wrote about in the book. As I said, there's lots of temple places. So many temple places have been lost. And places like something like Witherton. It's amazing, isn't it? So you got something like Witherton, which was the biggest preceptory in the country. You've got Faxfleet, which is a huge port, and there's not a stone left of them.
Thank you.
But as I say, most of them are towards the east because of the spread.
But the map you showed about Ireland was complete. Or else those overlaps don't mean anything.
The map, the map for the map of Ireland is just the temple place names, and the overlaps are with the Gaelic speaking. So that's sort of done, from what you can sort of see now, the temple place names now. But like I say, I'm not. It just is very, very intriguing the situation with Ireland. The other thing is that the temple place names, as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a castle or something. It's land that was it's land that's donated to the temples. It may be just that they administered it from somewhere else, which is quite common because it would be donated and then somebody would be looking after it. So it didn't definitely mean there was a big chapel there or a big church there. It may do, but. So thanks, Nigel.
So,